we got to talk about something that recently came up on the Spittin Chiclets podcast.
Ooh, Spittin Chiclets.
They were discussing the Edmonton Oilers and what the team should do with Connor McDavid and whether it actually makes sense for the Oilers to wait for it, to trade Connor McDavid, the best player in the world. I know
Bruno.
I know it's coming from a Leafs podcast to Leaf fans. I know, get in your hate comments. I know it's already coming. But
yeah,
when you think about it, it actually does make sense. And I know Oilers fans are going to come at us right now and say, you could say the same thing about the Leafs. They haven't won a playoff series, and Matthews' contract is coming up, and they should trade him too. And guess what? We have actually acknowledged that on this podcast. Like, it might get to a point where if Matthews does not sign his extension on July 1st, 2023, like the Leafs are actually going to have to consider trading him. That's in the realm of possibility. The same thing with William Nylander, whose contract expires at the exact same time as Austin Matthews. So with the Edmonton Oilers, man, this team is not good. All right. Like, they have been struggling this season. They are sitting 5th in the Pacific Division, which I think is the worst division in hockey. Disagree with me if you want. I think it's the worst. They are 20th in points percentage. So essentially, they have the 20th best record in the NHL. They are 21st in the league in goals against, and they have a -6 goal differential at 5-on-5. And if you want to look at goals for percentage at 5-on-5, the Oilers sit 21st in the NHL, scoring 48% of the goals at 5-on-5. Like, just not a good team, man. And you have the best player in the world, Connor McDavid, who's having another phenomenal season. He's probably going to win the Hart Trophy again. What do you do if you're Edmonton, man? Because, Lepore, this team again, and I know they were in the same boat last year around this time, where it looked like they were going to miss the playoffs, and then they went on a torrid pace. They get Evander Kane, and everything's hunky-dory, and they make the conference finals. But they're in the same position again, man. They could miss the playoffs again. Like, this team should be nowhere near this spot right now. So what do you think? Like, should they actually trade Connor McDavid?
Okay, here's the thing. We are all passionate fans of our favorite team, whether it's the Leafs, whether it's the Oilers, whether it's somebody else. And we feel connections to our players. And when topics like this come up, a lot of people naturally get defensive. Why would this player not want to play for my favorite team in my favorite market? That's ridiculous. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And if I'm an Oilers fan here, to me on this topic, I don't want to say I'm neutral, but I have the whole play in my head of it kind of is what it is. And I'll revert it back to Matthews like you did. If we go into next year and Matthews is unsigned and it doesn't look like he's going to sign, well, we have to make that move. And by we, I mean the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. And me as a fan, well, I'd rather us move him and get something than lose him for nothing. So there's nothing really to be upset about, is what I'm getting at. So as far as it goes with McDavid, they got to get in his brain, or they have to have a sit down and be like, look, do you see your longtime future as an Edmonton Oiler? And if he does, great. You have Connor McDavid. If he does not, you have to at some point look at those options. And that doesn't mean right now or in the summer or even after 1 year after this. I think you said he's got 3 years left on his deal. But again, if I'm an Oilers fan, I would rather trade Connor McDavid, and who knows what the fuck you would get for Connor McDavid, as opposed to just losing him for nothing. Ask Islanders fans about Tavares. What happened to them? Like, that sucks. That's like devastating for a franchise. Like, think of that turnaround. And I'll say it. I think back to when Sundin, I almost said Sandin, when Sundin walked in free agency, when we were apparently trying to trade him at the deadline. And I remember he didn't want to be like a deadline acquisition. He said, I mean, at least he said that publicly. He said, he didn't see himself like, the vision of him winning a cup was not that way, which I kind of call bullshit to Matt's, because he joined the Canucks like halfway through the season. But that hurt our franchise. Matt Sundin at the trade deadline would have been a huge haul for a team. And we got nothing. So if the Leafs could have started that sort of rebuild or weak spot with 2 prospects and teams did this back then, 2 prospects, a first round pick, and like a body in the lineup, things could have been different. It changes a lot. So again, to sum it up, you want what's best for your team. So it doesn't really matter. All that matters is if that player, and we're talking about Connor McDavid, wants to be with that team for an extended period of time. Because if he doesn't, and again, that is what it is. You can't control that. You can't convince him. And I'm talking about any player. You have to make the move. You have to do what's better for the organization. So if I'm an Oilers fan and Connor doesn't want to be here, I want it done. And to be honest, unless you really think this team can win a Stanley Cup by the end of his contract, I would want it to happen sooner rather than later, because the longer he's got on his deal, the more you're going to get in return for him. So it sucks to be a fan sometimes in these situations, but sometimes you have to sit back, catch reality, and ask yourself what is in fact better for your organization long term.
And never mind Connor McDavid, who after this season has 3 years remaining on his deal. They're going to have to make a tough decision on Leon Draisaitl as well.
Cha-ching. Yeah.
He has 2 years left on his contract. And to bring the Leafs into it again, his contract expires at the same time as Mitch Marner's and John Tavares. And I'm not saying Draisaitl's coming to the Leafs or anything like that, but these are all, it's tough decisions all around. Before they deal with McDavid, they got to deal with Draisaitl, because guess what? If Draisaitl doesn't want to be there, it's over already right there. Yeah. Never mind Connor McDavid. If Draisaitl's gone, the operation's over. He's not as important as Connor McDavid, but oh my goodness. I mean, he's right there next on the list in terms of the Oilers' most important players when it comes to actually winning a Stanley Cup. So they're going to have some tough decisions to make. And I agree. You just got to take emotion out of it. Like me and Lepore, we have completely accepted the fact that there's a possibility that Matthews might not be here. The same thing with Nylander. We've talked about this on the show. And it doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter how much we love Austin Matthews and how much Leafs Nation loves him. Like, if he doesn't want to be here and he doesn't sign an extension, then they're going to have to deal him. Now, I have gone on the record and said that I don't think that it's going to get to that point. Like, I think Matthews is going to re-sign. But guess what? If he doesn't sign that extension on July 1st, 2023, as I said, then you have to consider trading him. And it's the same thing with Connor McDavid. Like, if this team is going to continue on this trajectory where they're not getting any better, Lepore, I heard from every Oilers fan in the offseason, they're a true Stanley Cup contender. This team is ready to take the next step. This team stinks right now. Stinks. I'm sorry for to have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on your team. You should not have the 20th best record in the NHL and a negative goal differential at 5-on-5. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine this team's power play wasn't as good as it was, Lepore, where they would be in the standings right now?
Yeah, they're a bottom feeder.
It's scary,
they're a bottom feeder. But little things, right? Like, and not to bring it up, the Jack Campbell signing. Imagine they had that money to make a splash. Things might be different. And you mentioned Draisaitl too. You said Draisaitl has 2 years left after this.
Yeah.
So even to evaluate that as a team and as an organization, what the hell would be the return for Leon Draisaitl for 2 years at an $8 million salary?
King's ransom.
Oh my God. So again, you should want that. And let's face it, Draisaitl, it's funny because I remember we all trashed that contract when it got signed by it was Chiarelli, right? Who signed that deal?
Yeah.
We were all making fun of him, like $8 million. What has he done? Ends up being one of the best contracts in the National Hockey League. He like McKinnon is probably going to want to play catch up with his next deal. So I can see him just totally going to free agency and being like, who's the highest bidder? Or just cornering whatever team have, whether it's Edmonton or he gets traded or whomever, cornering that team into the biggest contract possible because he's been underpaid and he's a human and he's allowed to feel he's been underpaid and he's allowed to go for as much money as he wants and as much as he thinks he deserves.
And I think everyone's eyes have been opened up to the possibility of all of these things happening, as we've talked about, you know, McDavid and Draisaitl leaving Edmonton, Matthews leaving Toronto, because we've now seen it, right, in recent history. We saw it with John Tavares, and then we just saw it last season with Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, we just saw this. Those guys didn't want to be in Calgary. They're two best players. And now look at Calgary. Like, they're struggling as well. And that's why, like, it's in the realm of possibility. That's all I'm going to say. Like, you have to consider these things, especially if Edmonton is going to continue playing as poorly as they have been playing. I don't think Connor McDavid is going to be happy there. Like, it's just plain and simple. Like, why are you going to attach yourself to that situation? I get it. They won 2 rounds last year. But did you know, Lepore, the Oilers are 9-15 in their last 24 playoff games. The Leafs have a better record.
I think I've heard that stat,
in their last 25 to 27 playoff games than the Oilers do. The Oilers are 9-15. So don't get blinded by the fact like, oh, we made the conference finals. Well, guess what, Oilers fans? You've also been swept twice over recent playoff runs. 9-15 over their last 25 playoff games. And that's with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl going absolutely nuclear last season in the playoffs, having like the 2 best playoff performances we've seen since like Gretzky and Lemieux.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's
that's a stat. That's a stat, Bruno. I think what fans do as well is we look back on players from different eras, and of course, like there's like the Yzermans of the world that only played for one team. Joe Sakic comes to mind, Mario Lemieux. But quite often there's like these legends we look at, even guys with like their numbers in the rafters, and we picture them with the team, and then you look it up, and they weren't with that team for very long. Like a big one is Gilmore. I think Gilmore had only played 5 seasons in Toronto. So players move on. Like it's not this thing where they're there for 15 years all the time. And even Matthews, let's say Matthews walks at the end of his deal. That's 8 years. Played 8 years with the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's half his career. Like we can still look at him like, yeah, he spent a lot of time here. And I'm not saying we should be okay with the player leaving. But my point is that sometimes I think we forget that these things are temporary and not all these players just end up being in soccer. They call them like one club mans, like one team players essentially in hockey. So we have to prepare for it. And I know Oilers fans, I mean, those hairs are raising on their neck hearing this conversation. They're freaking out a little bit and it sucks. I mean, and I made the point about what the haul would be in a McDavid or Draisaitl trade. And at the end of the day, you're not getting a player like that back. And even the collection of players is not going to be as valuable as having Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl in your lineup, but you have to do the best you can to move forward. And I'm not completely shitting on it. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Connor McDavid wants the fuck out of Edmonton. I'm just saying if he doesn't see himself there long term, the same goes for Draisaitl. They got to make moves, man. They got to make moves.
Yeah, if I had to say whether he's going to stay or go, honestly, at this point, I would say he's probably going to go.
I'd bet he's not going to finish. As it stands now, with the job Ken Holland has done, and by that I mean a terrible job, why would he stay? Seriously. And I know Oilers fans, again, you don't want to hear that. This team, it's hard for it's going to be hard for them to be like ultra competitive. And I know they're losing, they don't have Kane, as you mentioned, so they are better than what we're seeing now. But we're talking about maybe the best player we've ever seen. The goal is Stanley Cups. Like a lot would have to change for this team in the next few years for them to be like a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. Like this team's going to win a Stanley Cup. So if I had to bet on it right now, he's not going to retire an Oiler.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, you could look at Ovechkin and say he didn't win a Stanley Cup until like year, whatever it was, like 13 or 14 of his career. But year in and year out, the Capitals were one of the best teams in the NHL.
Yeah,
they were winning President's trophies.
Yeah.
Top 5 record in the league. The same cannot be said for the Edmonton Oilers. I'm sorry, Oilers fans, but year in and year out, you are not one of the best teams in the league. I don't care that you won 2 rounds last year. Now you're 20th in the league again. This is not the same situation as Alexander Ovechkin and the Capitals, who year in and year out had one of the best records, were one of the top scoring teams, good defensively. Like every year they were a good team. And the same thing cannot be said about Edmonton.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see because, like I said, the first domino is going to fall with Draisaitl. Depending on what he decides to do, I think that'll pretty much determine the future of Connor McDavid, similar to what happened in Calgary with Johnny Gaudreau leaving. And then all of a sudden you start hearing all the rumors up. Matthew Tkachuk wants out as well. So, yeah.
This may come off like a stupid question, but what do you think, or what would you trade more for? McDavid at his salary or Draisaitl at his salary?
I'd still want McDavid.
Yeah, me too. I just thought I'd throw it out there because there is that thing of like the crazy price you're getting Draisaitl at. But yeah, Connor McDavid. So guys, comment down below if you think otherwise or agree with us.
Yes, let us know in the comments, should the Edmonton Oilers actually trade Connor McDavid before his contract runs out? Wild, wild times.